am Tara Williams, and I am a volunteer ambassador with Essteem. We are a startup that promotes people from underrepresented communities in technology through equalathons or hackathons for equality, hiring, recruiting, training, and other events. We are very excited to present our inaugural conversation today. We really hope to generate some real conversations with real people about issues and topics connected to diversity, equality, inclusion. The last 4 years and up through this year, we've had the Black Lives Matter movement, COVID-19 pandemic, and the insurrection of the United States Capitol. And these events have exposed the racism that has existed for years in our institutions and cultures. And I really think we've reached a point in time when we really want to do something that's truly addressing and changing the ways organizations think and implement hiring people from underrepresented communities. So more of us have opportunities for ourselves, our families, and our communities. I think most companies and organizations know that gender, ethnic, and cultural diversity and inclusion are good for their bottom lines, but are they really working to build more sustainable, long-term diverse and inclusive cultures, or are they simply checking their compliance or marking boxes with token or one-off hiring? Are these efforts actually harming the people they are trying to help? I'm really excited to have Dr. Orin Davis as our first guest at our Essteem platform here to chat about why he thinks diversity, inclusion, and equality initiatives fail. Dr. Davis is the first person to receive a Ph.D. in positive psychology from Claremont Graduate University. He is a self-actualization engineer at the Quality of Life Laboratory, where he helps people develop and actualize their capabilities by helping them channel their uniqueness to create works of lasting value. He uses his expertise to advise tech startups, Fortune 1000 companies, accounting firms, nonprofits on their diversity hiring strategies and processes. And Dr. Davis has written a number of articles on hiring, workplace culture, employee engagement, positive psychology, team flow, and creativity for psychology journals, Medium, and other blogs. And he serves on the editorial board of the International Journal of Wellbeing. And he's conducted talks and presentations at universities and colleges, the World Bank, TEDx, Maryland, and Lunacon. Dr. Davis, have I forgotten anything? What did I miss?
It's a wonderful welcome. Thank you so much, Tara.
Yeah, no, my pleasure, Dr. Davis. Thank you for joining us. I know you have a very, very busy schedule, so let's just dive right into it.
Sure.
What's going on? What's going right and what's failing, please?
So I think the thing that's most going right is the awareness, because as you pointed out in the intro, this has been going on for an extremely long time, certainly longer than I've been alive, probably longer than any of us have been alive. There's hundreds, if not thousands, of years of discrimination, bias, and it's mostly just been underground, and now it really is coming out to the surface, and people are paying attention to it now. We're actually thinking about it. We're recognizing, how much we as humanity need to develop and evolve, and that is a great thing. Sometimes the first thing is to recognize that you have a problem and that there is a problem, and we as a society have a huge problem, and we're starting to actually know it. That is great. The thing is, we're not quite figuring out what to do about it, and that's where it's not working so well. We haven't figured out what to do about it, and the biggest thing is when you have a problem, the first thing that a lot of people want to do is they just want it fixed now, like yesterday, and there's a lot of urgency towards trying to make this work. And can you blame anybody? Like, of course we all want this fixed yesterday, like especially as we realize that there's such a problem, we want it fixed yesterday. The problem is that many of the expedient measures that we would take to solve this problem, they're not going to work. They're actually going to make the problem worse. And like, as you push hard against problems, they tend to push back. And because of that push and pull and reaction, like you end up going too fast, and you end up making the pendulum swing instead of just moving the needle in a specific direction. We have to think about slow change more than anything else.
Well, it's interesting that you brought that up, Dr. Davis. I was reading a 2020 McKinsey and Company report about inclusion and diversity. And, the data, what I've gathered is everybody knows it's good for the bottom line. Diversity is good for the bottom line. And the sentiment on diversity is, very positive, 52% positive and 31% negative. But when you're talking about inclusion, it's a lot worse. Only 29% positive and 61% sentiment on that. And then there are other indicators that say that inclusion, which they consider equality, openness, and belonging, there were high levels of negative sentiment about equality and fairness of opportunity. So, I mean, what would you attribute that to in terms of what we're talking about this conversation? Theoretically, everybody likes diversity. We know it's great. But again, what I was saying in the beginning, in terms of checking off the compliance boxes, when we're looking to really operationalize this, it looks like there might be some issues with certain company cultures and the people in them.
Yes. So wow, so much of that to unpack. Let me start by saying that nobody, and I mean nobody, has good data on how diversity affects the bottom line. It could be great, it could be horrid. We don't have anything right now. Most of the data we do have, it's correlative at best. And the statistician's mantra as it goes, correlation is not causation, correlation is not causation, correlation is not causation. We do see a relationship between these two things. But the funny thing about it, by the way, and you mentioned that people don't really like inclusion very much. The irony is inclusion's where the money is. Because it doesn't matter how much diversity you have, without inclusion, you will not be able to do anything with your diversity. No company can maximize their diversity unless there's inclusion, because otherwise you're not going to bring these diverse voices to the table. Right. And that's a big thing. And so you can't harness the diversity. Now, equity, equality, like these two things are really funky, and they also have a lot of context, complications, implications that are going to rub certain people the wrong way, because it all depends on how you're defining it, how you're implementing it. The idea of equal opportunity, that's going to ring well for just about everybody. But as soon as you start bringing in, we're going to do things differently for different people, for different reasons, suddenly people start to want to push back on that, because they don't necessarily like the idea that some people are going to be getting more than others, regardless of the reason. There's going to be this immediate desire for fairness, and they're not going to, people don't necessarily want to look past that first piece. They're just looking at, well, we're not all getting the same, and that's not fair. Except that, then if you look one step past that, you realize, yeah, because we're not all in the same place, and that's not fair. And so it's like, we've got compounding challenges of fairness and to fairness that are getting in the way of all this. And so, at the end of the day, what I would say is that, first of all, inclusion is where the money is. And if nobody's got inclusion, it doesn't matter. Your diversity is worthless. So that's the first thing we've got to get.
How do we make sure that the decision makers and the people at the ground level are aligned, and you can build something that's meaningful, that works, and it's not doing more harm and breeding more resentment with people? Dr. Davis.
Start by making it meaningful. Because often when you ask companies, and I do this, as a diversity consultant, when I ask companies, why do you need diversity? Why do you want diversity? They actually can't answer that question. They're either throwing out platitudes, they're throwing out generic information, or they're throwing out, some correlation study they read. Yeah, we heard it's good for the bottom line, or, it makes us look good, or we don't want to get sued. And usually it's one of those three things ultimately. When you drill down, it's some, nice fancy way of saying one of those three things. None of those things is a reason to have diversity. People say diversity helps creativity. Well, there's a funny thing about that. First of all, without inclusion, it's worthless. But even with inclusion, everybody misses one of the drawbacks of diversity, and it's the difficulty in getting consensus. The more you have different voices at the table, the harder it can be, not necessarily, but the harder it can be for them to agree.
So what do you do? What do you do?
So therein lies, the value of creating a culture where everybody can be heard and where everybody can feel validated and respected. And that's really hard to do. It's really easy to say. You got to make sure everybody's heard, validated, and respected. That's really hard to do in practice, especially as you add more diversity to the table, because validating an opinion you don't understand or validating an opinion that's so different from yours can be really hard to do. And then once everybody feels heard and understood, you begin to recognize that we've all got to take some action. Otherwise, we're just going to sit here at some kind of stalemate where we're all disagreeing and we're also not getting anything done. Like nobody's getting their way. And yeah, you're always going to have some people who are like, well, my way or the highway. Honestly, especially in business, those people you want to kick away from the table because they're not really being inclusive and they're not really helping. But if you can't do that, and sometimes you can't, then it comes down to like still building understanding, having the patience to push forward, understand what everybody's being driven by, and how to basically address as many of those drives as possible. And time is of the essence, and therein lies the problem. All these things, they take time. Diversity, inclusion, harnessing those things. It doesn't happen in a minute, it doesn't happen in 5, and it doesn't happen in 60. And sometimes people just don't have the time, or they think they don't have the time. And so they don't put it in, and then they lose.
So what would your argument be for making the time? Say if you're a startup and you don't have like an HR partner, or you're in a large public company and you are under the gun to make profits quarter over quarter, and this just really is low on the priority list, but you want to do something a little more than checking off those compliance boxes and not getting sued. So how would you like practically operationalize this maybe in those different environments, Dr. Davis?
You're not going to like this, but my answer is you don't. You've not created an environment, the company has not created an environment where this is actually possible. First of all, quarter over quarter profits, I don't have to explain how dangerous that is. That's a bad idea in general. It's bad business in general. I mean, I'm not saying ignore quarter over quarter profits, but that shouldn't be the only priority. And when a company isn't thinking long term like that, you've got a general problem. And yeah, under the gun, you will never make diversity, equity, or inclusion under the gun. And what I would say to that is, don't try. Honestly, don't try. It's not a high enough priority for you. And the pretense that it is can only backfire. If you're that kind of under the gun, you have much bigger fish to fry, which may very well be about keeping your doors open long enough for DEI to be worth anything. Mm-hmm. So, I mean, listen, some companies, they're saying that, and listen, I worry about those companies. I mean, their investors should be worrying about them, the stakeholders should be worrying about them. But at the same time, I would argue that for DEI, no effort is better than a bad effort.
Really? And can you share some examples of some of these bad efforts and anything that you did to mitigate or to clean up, or you didn't even try, it wasn't worth it?
Well, it's sort of like, just for instance, when companies are going to hire people just to tick off boxes as some kind of expedient way, the problem is they lose their credibility for hiring well or fairly, because people the rumors start to spread that people got hired because they ticked the box. And at that point, it becomes who they are. The new hire doesn't get respected. Nobody's looking to explore how good they are. That's not what they're about anymore. They're about ticking the box. And when there's talk at the water cooler that X got hired because they ticked this box, it's like, we're not talking about X's capabilities. We're not talking about their talents, their skills, and people aren't necessarily going to trust them, which means they're not going to get included. They're just going to be brought on, and the company loses the credibility, and people dislike the effort because they know that it's a token effort. And by the way, I feel really bad for X, because X is going to figure this out really fast. Now, how do you feel knowing that you got brought onto a company, you took a job that a whole bunch of other people wanted, and it wasn't because you were good, and it wasn't because you were talented, it's because you ticked the box. Now, the odds are that's probably not true. There probably was some good talent to you and all those things. But since everybody's talking about that, and nobody's approaching you and finding out what your talents are, that's what you think. And X is going to be thinking that way, and is going to have to confront that. How long do you think you're going to keep them? And what kind of experience do they have? And in the meantime, if they don't last at the company, that further taints the DEI efforts. So it creates a whole backfire situation. So generally speaking, I like to tell companies, like, if you're not going to go the whole 9 yards, don't go the one either, because these cosmetic fixes, you're not fooling anybody, at least not for any real length of time, and people figure it out. And treating people like they're idiots or like they don't figure it out, that's a bad message to send to your employees. They do figure it out. And if they don't figure it out, and even worse is if they get the wrong idea, a lot of trust gets lost, and then you have to rebuild the trust, and then you're back at zero.
Hmm. So, I mean, let's try to move towards something that our viewers can implement easily in terms of trying to start creating a foundation of inclusion and belonging. Can you share some of your thoughts on how people, I mean, do they build mentoring programs? Do they build affinity programs?
Well, again, it comes, so I think that the fundamental question is why your company would benefit from having a diverse group of people, from including a wide range of opinions. And you've got to be able to tie it into the mission and the value proposition of the company. Why does having that diversity help? Why does bringing in this wide range of voices help? Why does ensuring fairness in the company help? And you know what? Some of this may seem to be obvious, but like when I'm working with companies, I really sit down with them, like, you need to articulate this. Really get out the values, spend the time, and put that in. And you know what? The thing is, it's actually quite easy to do, especially with a trained facilitator, and there are many of us out there. But it does take time, and you've got to be willing to make that investment. And if you're not willing to make that investment, once again, it's very hard to do, because without the inclusive culture and without this coming from the top, if it's not an initiative coming from the top, again, it's going to run into a brick wall sooner or later. And that could actually end up like, when you hit a brick wall, you don't just stop, you bounce backwards.
No,
and when a DEI initiative hit the brick wall, it bounces backwards. It's counterproductive. You will lose ground.
So once you start and you work with a company, an organization, to identify their values, their mission, and you get buy-in from management, like, you implement this, and I know it might be tailored for each organization, but how do you measure the success of an organization's DEI program, Dr. Davis?
So part of that is you want the organization to come up with their own KPIs. These key performance indicators are going to be different for every company. And I mean, just for an example, a lot of companies like to use the diversity numbers. I liken the use of diversity numbers to taking your temperature. It's a great indicator of your health, but it's not the only indicator. You could have a perfectly normal temperature and be sick as anything. You can also have a high fever and have a very easily fixed problem, even though you're sick. And so it's like, it's a good number to look at, but that's not everything. More what you want to look at is a climate survey. You want to find out, do people really feel included? Can people really say what's on their minds? Can they share themselves and the best of their efforts, and even further put in discretionary efforts towards the community? And can they bring that to work? And are they able to? And many of these things, they're actually in the little details and nuances of the workplace. So like, one company I was talking to, I told them, once you've got it at the top, there's a whole bunch of little things, little bits and policies that you can implement to make the company more inclusive. And I mean, they're little, they're simple. And people may scoff at this, but I just want to point out the simplicity. And like, it's a little something, it's a small win. My favorite example, food. Whenever you're serving food, is everybody eating? And you know something? It says a lot about a company when you can walk into any event and they've actually got a diverse array of people and everyone's eating. It's pretty rare.
So, I mean, does that reflect the thoughts that they put into the food that they had put on, they had laid out?
It does, because just something as simple as respecting people's dietary restrictions. And as an Orthodox Jew, I've obviously got a lot of them. So, when I walk into a place, I one of the reasons why I notice the food situation is that I'm used to a restricted diet. I've got other restrictions on my diet, and I've got other friends who are Muslim. I've got friends who are in AA. I've got friends who have restrictions on their diets in a whole range of situations. And like, for instance, I went to a happy hour, and my friend from AA couldn't, like, he was extremely uncomfortable the whole night because the only thing to drink besides alcohol was water. And so he and I are standing there drinking water. I don't drink either for other reasons. But he and I don't drink. We're like the two people in the entire room who aren't drinking, and we're drinking water, and everybody else is drinking these beers and wines, and it looks great. But how do you think he and I feel in that room? Or you've got a whole bunch of things in the room, but there really aren't good vegan options for the devout Buddhists that are there. And okay, that's not like vegan. Not all vegan options are created equal. And different people have different standards about what this all needs to be. Look into it. And people are like, yeah, but I want to do something nice and fancy. It's not worth doing something. Again, this is a value conflict, right? If you want to do something nice and fancy, then do something nice and fancy. But if nice and fancy ends up excluding people, you've negated the nice and fancy.
Well, but what if it wasn't by design or intentions? Like, some people in some organizations are just clueless about dietary. I'll use dietary guidelines because that's what we're talking about. Does that automatically signal to a person that, hey, they don't care about me, and I really feel like I've been excluded because they don't know I can't eat this or that? Honestly,
Tara, yes.
Really?
Yes, it does, because it's not that hard. Okay. I mean, I say this like many people who are religious, especially Muslims who are very strict with halal, observant Jews who keep kosher, Buddhists, Hindus, they all have very, very strict diets. And you know what? We're happy to tell you how to do it. And just sending out some kind of anonymous survey. We want to serve food in an event. We need to know your dietary restrictions. Just tell us. People who are gluten-free, right? People who don't drink. And there's so many people who don't drink for so many different reasons, right? And I mean, I think, for example, another event that I was at where one of my Mormon friends, again, they had tea and coffee, but a lot of Mormons don't drink tea and coffee. So it was tea, coffee, and alcohol, three things, that Mormons don't drink, and water. And so once again, like we're excluding a Mormon participant who would have otherwise, been, and he was really nice about it in the whole thing. And many of us are really nice about it. Nobody's going to say anything, but you sense it, because how hard would it have been to have fruit juice? I mean, if you think about how expensive beer is, for the price of a 6-pack, you could have had a couple of cartons of fruit juice, and my Mormon friend could have had something to drink that wasn't tea, coffee, or alcohol, or rather something to drink that wasn't water. And it's that simple. And the whole point is, it is that simple. That's why I pick on the food, because when I come into a place, they're serving food and I can't eat. You know what that says to me? It says it wasn't worth the effort, and it's not much of an effort.
Interesting. Thank you. And any other sort of easy, low barrier to entry of inclusive strategies and tactics?
Yeah, a couple. So one of them is flex time. So flexible holiday schedules. These days, especially with knowledge work, people have more than enough to do, that they can work any day of the week, even if the market's closed. Really, really, any knowledge workers got more than enough to do. And consequently, just giving people their choice of holidays is truly an amazing thing. And for example, Christmas. There's a whole lot of people in America that don't celebrate Christmas and would be perfectly happy to work that day if it were a weekday and use that day somewhere else. Why is that? And believe me when I say it, there's more than enough that they can do on Christmas. And back when I actually worked at Mass General, which is a hospital, so it's open 24/7, 365, so I could come in on Christmas. I had such a productive day. I came in, I got so much work done. I put in a day and I went home, and it was great. No distractions, no nothing. So it's wonderful, but it also felt so good. And it felt like I was respected there, that like they respect my holidays, I can respect their holidays. We can all cover for one another. And that makes that, again, it's a little thing. It's not that hard to do. And really all it takes is trusting that your employees know that they've got a job to do and that they're willing to get it done. And giving them that trust by saying, you know what, I'm not supervising you on Christmas. You have work to do. You're telling me you're going to get it done. Awesome. You go get that done. And if you want to take off Eid al-Fitr, Instead, take off without fitr. It's fine.
Any other sort of quick fixes, if you will, to implement inclusion strategies, whether you're a company of 10 people or whether you're a company of 500 people?
Flex time is another good one. And limiting meetings or confining meetings to certain times. I mean, for those who haven't seen Jason Fried's TED Talk or read Jason Fried's book Rework, I mean, these are good resources for just how to rethink meetings and all that stuff. Again, I got a draw from Mass General and the lab that I worked in there. They actually had a really great policy, and it was this: you got to put in an 8-hour day, and you've got to be in the office for 2 consecutive hours. Between the hours of 11 and 3, you have to be in it for a pre-declared 2 consecutive hours. And other than that, they really didn't care when you did your work. If I wanted to work, let's say, 5 to 1, that's fine. I can work 5 a.m. to 1 p.m. if it makes me feel better. Or, if I want to work, 1 p.m. to 9 p.m. or whatever that is. Or even if I wanted to work in blocks, like if I wanted to work, 2:30 to 6:30 a.m. and then, 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. He probably wouldn't care, because again, it's just that, like, this 11 to 3 block, everybody needs to be there for a predictable 2 hours, and just get everybody to overlap. And that flexibility means that, like, if I needed to leave to take care of a relative, or if I have a doctor's appointment, or if I have an errand or whatever else, again, nobody's counting on me. Everybody knows the hours I'm going to be in, and everything else is going to be done by, email, Slack, whatever else it is. And we can make a really good system that way. And it also gives people the ability to keep what's private, right? Those who have personal things that they need to deal with, or they, got a doctor's appointment. You don't want to tell everybody you got a doctor's appointment. Okay, fine. I don't need to know. You're not here. It's okay. I assume you're on top of your work.
And it seems like this could be applied, obviously, to all of the remote workers who are now working remotely because of the pandemic as well.
On the pandemic and with remote work, this is twice as important. Like, it's so much more important. Like, this is important all the time, but when we've got the remote work situation, it's like, look, we can get interruptions at any time. Things can happen at any time. And, even if you've got a situation where everything's under control in your domicile, you've still got that phone call, any phone call where somebody in your life has got a problem now. I mean, this can happen. And we do need to be understanding of that, or people need your assistance, something along those lines. We're all taking care of one another here. Even when we're just living by ourselves, we still have other people that we're seeing to. And just being able to think about that in advance and give people that flexibility. Again, these are little things, but they matter so much. And this is really about the inclusion. And when people have this flexibility to be themselves, they actually start to bring themselves to work.
Well, yeah, I mean, you bring up a good segue, and that is, how can we, especially right now during the pandemic with everybody working remotely, and some of us haven't even met some of the people that we volunteer with or work with in person. We just see a talking head on the screen. Nonetheless, Dr. Davis, how do you think we can become better allies, or a better ally for people to encourage this remote corporate culture or community in a better way?
So honestly, sometimes the first thing we have to do is have compassion for the fact that may just not be possible. And to recognize that right now, many of us are just head down trying to get through this. And like adding that extra pressure of like, well, we're trying to make this good for you, so why don't you participate? You know what? If they can't participate, that's fine. And that's going to be hard to do. But right now, having that compassion for, you know what, maybe it really is enough that we're just squeaking by. And that is a lot right now. And all of us are dealing with so much more than you're going to be able to see in a Zoom call. And that's a challenge. And there's stuff we don't want to talk about. And there's stuff that's going on. And like little stresses, little things. But little things, research on stress shows little things can add up. And these little things become bigger things. And even the ways in which we dissipate stress, many of our coping mechanisms aren't necessarily available to us the way that they used to be. Having compassion for that, recognizing we're probably not going to be thriving right now. Maybe a few people are, but generally most people are not thriving right now. Most people are barely surviving. And you know what? that's good right now. And we have to have compassion and respect for the fact that right now, that's good, that's okay, and that's enough. And yeah, you know what? If we can do more, that's fine. But I think the most important thing is opening up that how can we help? And in some cases, how can you help? Shut up and go away. And when you get told shut up and go away, don't take offense. It's
Mm.
not you, and it's not them rejecting you. It's they've got too much right now, and they just want to be able to get their work done and go deal with whatever else they need to deal with. And that's all they can that's all they can muster right now. And let us say that that's okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I think I read something along the lines about some of these efforts should also be voluntary, and that's some of the reasons why some of these DEI initiatives fail, because people see them as forced upon them and
Mhm.
mandatory, which breeds even more resistance and
Yeah.
resentment on top of the existing.
And along those lines, one of the things that I want to add is for those who have the capacity and want to help, first of all, it might just be to listen, but also what it might be there to do is to actually be the person that they say shut up and go away to. And it may seem like that's a hard thing, but giving them that freedom, actually giving them, empowering them to say shut up and go away can actually do a lot for them. Just to be able to finally say it out loud, like I can't deal with any more of this. And somebody is going to validate that and say that that is okay. That can be an amazing thing.
That's healthy, is what you're saying?
Yeah, sometimes we just need it. We need to be validated in that because, and a lot of people right now are not feeling that validation. They want to scream it out to so many people, so many things, and so on. They just want to say, everybody just shut up and go away. I'm doing what I can do. I'm doing the best I can. Leave me alone. And, for somebody to say, okay, yeah, you know what? That's totally cool. I hear that makes a lot of sense. I'm going away now.
Well,
And
I mean, yeah, go ahead, sorry.
just to do that listening, to give that validation. And similarly, as you pointed out, we're having real issues with DEI right now, and people are having very, very hard experiences. And because of
I mean,
that,
is there anything else, Davis, in terms of what we should?
I'm sorry, I think the internet cut out there. I apologize.
I missed that. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. So what I was saying is that, like, for many of us, we have to be able to listen to one another. And right now, we're having so many trouble. Many groups are having trouble with issues. They're often facing microaggressions. They're facing maltreatment of many forms. There are a couple of notable groups that are dealing with this right now. And it might be worthwhile just to be able to, if you want to help, put your ear out there and listen. Let people vent to you. Let them say what they need to say and validate that. Like, yeah, I hear that. And even if I don't understand that, even if I don't understand what's going on, and I don't understand what your experience is, I hear what your experience is. And maybe I don't understand it firsthand, and I don't know what this experience feels like. I understand that this is a bad experience. I understand that you're upset, and it is a rational and reasonable thing that you're upset. I validate the fact that you're upset, and this is why. And one more thing I would say people should be able to say is, like, and that this shouldn't be happening to you. Like, this is wrong. This shouldn't be happening to you.
Well, I appreciate that very much as somebody who is an Asian American right now. I'm very concerned given the pandemic. So thank you, Dr. Davis. But I will say anecdotally, I find that to be a challenge that people who develop this skill, I mean, it's not an easy skill to develop in many different contexts. So I would acknowledge the effort, but I also have found firsthand that it is a totally foreign concept for certain people to just listen and understand this perspective because it's not their experience,
Mhm.
because they are not the other, they are not a person of color or somebody from an underrepresented community.
And those people right now, they've got enough challenges that demanding that they also listen may be a little much. And as much as we may want to demand that they do, and as much as we may, as angry as we are, and I'm speaking also from my own minority perspective as a Jew, there's a lot of anti-Semitism that is rampant right now. As angry as we are for all that's happening to us as communities, as people, as underrepresented minorities, as folks who are the other, Right now, some people may not be able to listen, they may not want to listen, and that may mean that we have to do that for each other. And you know what? It is not fair. Let's just take a moment to say it is not fair that we have to put in this additional emotional labor. Yes, it's not fair. It's totally horrid, but that's still where we're at. And many people who are just barely getting by in this pandemic, they may not be able to find the space to listen right now. And many of them may not be able to tap into their own humanity on this for the marginalized communities. And as hard as that is, we may just have to accept that, or at very least grin and bear it. And you know what? That's not fair. That is not fair. That's not right. And still in all, that may be what we have to do anyway. And yeah, you know what? That pisses me off. And I'm sure it pisses you off. And I'm sure that anybody who's from a marginalized community hearing that notion that we just have to grin and bear it like we always do, like we've been doing for centuries, millennia, whatever. These are different times. And yes, we should put our voices out there, and we should make sure that we can be heard as best as we can. And those of us who have the energy to put it out there, we will. And those of us who have the energy to take care of one another and listen to one another, we will. And slowly, slowly, there will be more and more people who are able to listen. And slowly, slowly, someone's voice will echo with the humanity of somebody else's spirit. And that echo will open up an ear. Slowly, slowly. And right now, as we're all just trying to get by, I think many of us are actually starting to see that spark of humanity in us as we recognize that so many people are in our situation where they're being marginalized for things that are beyond their control, or they're suffering for circumstances that are beyond their control. Oh, that's how it feels. And so they begin to empathize and they can begin to listen. And even if they're not able to listen now, that door gets opened and they can listen later. So as we put our voices out there and as people look back over the history of this time, we, the marginalized communities, our voices will still echo through history and they will echo well into the future. We have to know that and still put our voices out there as best as we can.
Dr. Davis, thank you. Those are very inspirational words. I hope to internalize them because I have learned to find my voice during this pandemic and help others. Before we go and wrap up, is there anything you have going on? Are you writing a book? Are you writing articles? Are you working on any podcasts or any new projects that we can talk about?
Always. There's always fun stuff going on right now. So I mean, I'm working with different clients. I'm giving workshops. I'm giving podcast talks. Good way to follow that is on Twitter. So DrOrinDavis, Dr. Orin Davis on Twitter. Also Medium, Dr. Orin Davis. Medium.com, I believe it is. But I'm Dr. Orin Davis on Medium. I am Dr. That's for the articles. Dr. Orin Davis on Twitter. Anytime I'm on a podcast, I post that there. Anytime I write an article, I post that there. And I'm always putting out research also, just scientific research. And people can find that on my website, www.qllab.org, qllab.org. And I'm always happy to talk to companies and answer questions about this. It's a very near and dear topic for me. So it's and wanting to see people valued and appreciated for their talents and being able to use their talents to the fullest. That's really a big part of self-actualization. And being a self-actualization engineer means that I really want to be showing people the mechanisms to self-actualization and how they can get there. And one of those things is finding and building inclusive environments.
Wow. Well, thank you. This has been a real great learning experience for me. I'm new to this whole world in this vein. I've been a token employee. I've been othered. So this perspective is really helping me put things in more of a context. So thank you, Dr. Orin Davis, for your time.
Thank you. And I really appreciate this opportunity. And if I can offer like one last word on this, as hard as this is going to be for all of us, we have to recognize that this is slow change. And as much as we want it yesterday, as much as we deserve it yesterday. And it should already be, and we should never have been in this position in the first place. It's gonna be a slow change. And if we try, and I'm not saying we shouldn't push against the restraints of slow change, but we do have to be patient, and we do have to recognize that this is going to go slowly. And as we push, there's going to be pushback, and we need to be slow, steady, and resilient and constant in the push. It's going to move slowly, and as much as we should be pushing, we should also be ready for slow change. Bring it in, be part of it, and as everyone adds their voices, we really, really will move the needle bit by bit.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Words to go by, to reference when we're fighting the good fight. Thank you, Dr. Davis.
Thank you, Tara. It's been great.